Random mutation is just that because of copying errors, radiation, drift, toxic material in the cellular environment, that the DNA messages degrade. So that's mutation. Then random selection is that this DNA is then subjected to the selective winnowing out that the environment lays against it. So by the meshing of these two processes, this is Darwinian theory, by the meshing of random mutation and natural selection, you get the slow incremental emergence of new forms. And these forms, some of which confer advantage and some don't. Most don't, and they're eliminated. Those that do stay in the system, and incrementally the system seeks to come to equilibrium with the selective forces that are operating on it. But these selective forces, which are continent, incidental radiation from space, weather, climate change, so forth and so on, because these factors are themselves changing over time, mutating, the system can never come to equilibrium. And so for Darwinian evolution, evolution is what's called a random walk. The system destabilizes, it corrects itself. It destabilizes, it corrects. Destabilizes, corrects. And after billions of years of this, lo and behold, you get animals like ourselves. But these 19th century evolutionists were keen to say, do not imagine that this is God's purpose, or that the final form was prefigured in the original form. No, this just happened like this. Well, now we've had 150 years to absorb all this. In the meantime, Mendelian genetics, the particulate nature of the gene has been understood. The molecular nature of the gene has been understood. We can say some new things about this. Also, we are no longer under the spell of deism. That's a crank idea that nobody is that keen for. And so it's a different intellectual world. Well, now when we look at nature, we see a different picture. We see that where Darwin said nature is all red in tooth and claw, we see that the way to be a successful species, the way to survive, is to make yourself indispensable to your neighbors. Then, instead of attempting to push you down and extinguish you, if you can cut deals with everybody in your neighborhood, providing various chemicals or energy supplies or other affects in the environment, then everybody will begin to pull your way. So in fact, cooperation is what is maximized among species. And a huge complex organic system like a coral reef or a rainforest is actually attempting to come to an equilibrium of balance that is the point of greatest benefit for the greatest number of organisms and species in the system. Well, this is a whole different picture. And it opens the possibility, these new sciences like complexity theory, global dynamics, chaos theory, have made it now respectable to think about processes that are drawn by something in the future rather than pushed from behind. In the 19th century, that was inconceivable. All that was known was the chain of cause and effect. But now we see that the temporal landscape has what are called basins of attraction in it, and that certain processes are actually drawn forward by their presumed end states. And so it seems less outlandish to us, I think, to suppose there is a purpose. And also we see a level of global integration and global mutation that Darwin couldn't have even dreamed of. Yes.
The idea of elements of time having their particular qualities. Have you correlated that with astrology at all?
Well, it's somewhat like astrology, except astrology believes that planets and stars and the arrangements among them represent shifts in a kind of energy field. In a way, this is more abstract. Wang Pi, who was a medieval Chinese mystic, his thought comes eerily close to my own, in that the way he pictured this was that you have the sequence moving in an abstract dimension, but you have the sequence moving at a certain speed, and overlaying that is another sequence moving at a different speed, and over that another version of the King Wen sequence moving at another speed, and that a given moment is a slice through these levels that creates a unique juxtaposition of the levels. So it is in that sense very astrological, but it's all calculated independent of any observation of nature. Although, if it's true, then it's interesting that there are correlations in the cycles in the King Wen sequence to astrological cycles. Specifically, the system that I elaborated on one level contains a cycle of 384 days. That's the number of lines, 6 times 64, the number of lines in a complete sequence of the I Ching, 384 days. Well, it happens to be 13 lunar cycles, exactly. Well, then if you take it times 64, you get a number, 67 years, 0.10425 days, which is 6 sunspot cycles. And sunspot cycles also occur in 33-year cycles. Well, it's known that the early Han Dynasty Chinese knew about sunspot cycles. They were the first people to observe them. So, without hypothesizing super technologies or any kind of Atlantis-type stuff, we see that the King Wen sequence could have been a kind of gear used in a system of multiplicans that predicted lunar cycles, sunspot cycles on 2 levels, and then with one further multiplication, this precessional great year, this 26,300 year cycle. So it's a neat kind of resonance calendar, and given the sorry state of Chinese calendar making in historical time, it's interesting that you can derive a very accurate calendar from the I Ching, more accurate than the calendar we're presently operating on, if you use a 384-day year length. The problem, of course, is that a year of that length would precess against the sun, but this may have been for political or religious or philosophical reasons acceptable at the time that calendar was formulated. My fancy is that there was a war, a calendrical war in the pre-Shang dynasty time, a war between the solar materialists and the lunar mystics, and it was basically a war about how the calendar should be, because the calendar is the largest frame of reality. For instance, our calendar, with its fixed equinoctial points, is a lie. Our calendar promotes a belief in the permanence of eternity, when in fact everything is slipping and sliding around. The fact that the equinoctial points are traversed every year on the same solar year day gives rise to a kind of patriarchal hubris, arguably. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Schizophrenia is a very complicated subject because several syndromes, which are quite different, are all lumped under schizophrenia.